Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to break down the arguments from a pretty provocative source video. It questions a major shift in India's foreign policy, and it all starts with a dramatic incident at sea. Okay, let's dive right in. The source we're examining frames its entire argument with a really powerful question. Just imagine this for a second. A friendly naval ship, one that just finished joint exercises with your country, is suddenly attacked in nearby waters. What do you think happens next?
So, the source builds its entire case around this alleged timeline. It starts with the Iranian warship Iris Dina being welcomed to India for a Bridges of Friendship exercise. Then, just a couple of weeks later, that very same ship is reportedly sunk by a U.S. torpedo, killing 87 sailors. But the most crucial point, according to the source, is what came after. Just an official silence from the Indian government.
And this alleged silence? Well, that's the absolute core of the source's argument, especially when you measure it against India's own proclaimed role and responsibilities in the Indian Ocean.
Now, this is where it gets really interesting. The source uses this direct quote, attributed to Prime Minister Modi, to establish India's official stance. You see, India has positioned itself as a net security provider, basically the main guardian of the Indian Ocean. And that statement, well, it sets a pretty high bar for what you'd expect them to do.
And there it is. This slide perfectly illustrates the central contradiction the source is trying to expose. This huge gap between the powerful rhetoric of being a guardian and the alleged inaction when a crisis erupted, literally in its own backyard.
To back this claim up, the source lists several very specific points. It alleges that India got a distress call but didn't even attempt a rescue, leaving that job to the Sri Lankan Navy. It also cites the Iranian ambassador, who apparently reported no official communication, and a former diplomat who claimed the ship was essentially unarmed for its return journey.
Now, according to the source, this incident isn't just some one-off thing. No, it's presented as a clear symptom of a fundamental break from India's long-standing independent foreign policy.
The source uses this historical comparison as key evidence. It highlights how past prime ministers, from different political parties, publicly condemned foreign interventions, even when it was their allies doing it. This policy was famously known as strategic autonomy. The source then contrasts this entire history with the current government, arguing that that tradition has been completely abandoned.
So this leads to the million-dollar question that the source explores. Why? Why would such a major policy shift happen? And to try and find a reason, it turns to a series of pretty serious allegations coming from opposition figures. To build its case for this deliberate alignment, the source points to what it calls a glaring double standard. It highlights that while there was silence on the initial attack on Iran, which reportedly caused over 1,000 casualties, there was a swift and very strong public condemnation for Iran's retaliation, which caused 9. Okay, so here we're just neutrally outlining the allegations as they're cited in the source video. These are attributed to opposition leaders in India, and they suggest a whole range of potential motives, from a strategic surrender to the U.S., all the way to a theory that the prime minister is compromised, possibly due to blackmail linked to corruption charges against a major Indian conglomerate.
The source material then uses this direct quote attributed to opposition leader Rahul Gandhi to voice the most pointed and frankly provocative explanation for this alleged policy shift. It directly ties the Prime Minister's actions to corporate interests and pressure from the Trump administration. And this is where the source pivots. It argues that these high-level geopolitical decisions aren't just abstract ideas floating around. It connects them directly to something every single person understands: the money in their wallet. The narrative points to this very simple fact. India is heavily reliant on the Middle East for its energy. 55% of its oil comes from the region. So, when Iran allegedly shuts down the Strait of Hormuz, which is a critical shipping lane, this dependency becomes a massive economic vulnerability. So, the source basically lays out this chain reaction. First, the foreign policy choices allegedly interrupt the oil supplies. Then, because the country has limited strategic reserves, it becomes vulnerable. This, it claims, forces India to seek U.S. permission for oil purchases, which finally leads to domestic fuel and gas prices going up for everyone at home. And this detail is presented in the source video as the ultimate proof of a loss of strategic autonomy. The very idea that a sovereign nation would need permission from another country to trade is framed as proof of a compromised position on the world stage.
And finally, the source connects all these big geopolitical threads to a single concrete number: a reported 60 rupee increase in the price of a household LPG cylinder. This is how it makes the political personal, turning a foreign policy debate into a kitchen table issue. And that brings us to the central provocative question posed by the source material. It ultimately leaves you, the viewer, to weigh the arguments presented and to consider the potential costs, geopolitical, economic, and maybe even moral, of a nation's silence.